Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Shin Hanga, the new print movement of Japan by Barry Till. This is what the book looks like. I'm going to be discussing what's in this book, what you can expect if you get this book, and then the second half of this video is just going to be me showing off the great prints in this book. I find in art books the art should take center stage, so there's going to be two parts. First, what is in this book, and then second, just the favorite prints that I found in this book. So a few things to note before we dive in. This is my second book on Shin Hanga. This is an art movement that took place in Japan, and I'll be going a little bit more into the history, but this is, again, the second book that I have read on this topic in about a month. The other book was Shin Hanga. I think it was New Prints in Modern Japan, and that is in my video library, and you can find the video there, or I will link it at the end of this video. So I am a little familiar with this topic, this being the second book that I have read on it, but I still had a fantastic time. This was one of those books where I feel like the cover really sold me. I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but when a book has a really fantastic cover, I just want to pull it out. It's so beautiful, so pretty, and I just fell in love, so I decided to place it on hold and get it out and give it a read. So this book is divided into two sections. The first section just gives a brief history of Shin Hanga, the art movement, what it is, where it took place, some key players and key artists in the movement, and the time frame that it was important in. The second half are prints, primarily by the artists that were discussed in the first half of the book, but they just are a description of the prints, who did them, and some key information. So I'll give you an example here, just a little bit of information. There's not really text on the print sections. All the text is really at the beginning, just enough to give you the key details about the print that you are looking at. And all of the prints come from the same art gallery. It is Art Gallery of Greater Victoria by British Columbia, which after reading this book makes me really want to go visit. British Columbia is one of those places I just need to get to. It seems so beautiful, and now I have another excuse to visit. So Shin Hanga is similar, but in some ways distinct from an art movement that many of us are more familiar with, which is the ukiyo-e art movement. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. I do not speak Japanese. Many of us are familiar though with the print masters like Hakusai, who made these beautiful prints that we think about when we think of Japanese art. And if you're familiar with prints like the Great Wave, there are prints that you've definitely seen, even if that word is not familiar to you. And I love these ukiyo-e prints. I love these Japanese woodblock prints. I find them absolutely beautiful. And they had a role in a time, in a heyday in history. I think around the 1800s was really when they peaked. You have those 1860s, 70s, and 80s. But if you're an art historian, please feel free to correct me in the comments. So they had this heyday. But then we had a movement into Meiji era Japan. I'm so sorry for these pronunciations. Again, I do not speak Japanese. During this, I believe it was the Meiji Restoration is what it's actually called, if we can think back to world history. There was an emphasis on moving forward in Japan and putting it into modernity. And it was really quite impressive, and this book talks about it in the beginning sections, how quickly Japan advanced into a modern state, into a modern player on the world stage. And the emperor and the government at this time was impressing the importance of Westernization and taking the benefits that could be found in Western civilization and putting it into practice in Japan. And this also spilled over into the art style, but some people were thinking that they were losing, they being artists in the art world in Japan, was losing what made Japanese art special. And as a result, some people wanted to bring back some of the more classic focus of what Japanese woodblock prints had been. A key player in this is someone who gets a lot of screen time in this book, and for good reason, because really it was started with the efforts of one man, and that is Watanabe Shozaburo. I'll show his name right here, so if I'm saying it wrong, you can see it. He wanted to re-emphasize traditional Japanese arts and Japanese subjects. So he has kind of revitalized this ukiyo-e style of woodblock printing, which is a less of a focus on an individual artist, but more working with the person who's going to be doing the woodblock prints and the artist, and collaborating between them, as well as, again, that emphasis on traditional Japanese arts and subjects. So he brought this focus back in the art movement we call Shin Hanga, which ran from the early 1900s to about the 1960s, when the great masters of this art print passed away. So when you look at these prints, you can tell they're distinct from the ukiyo-e style, but you can tell that they definitely have inspiration from it. And in their heyday, they were really competing with this other art style called Sosaku Hanga. Again, your pronunciations, so sorry, which focused more on that Western influence in art. So maybe things like perspective or drawing in the round or things that we associate with Western art. And if I had to guess that Sosaku Hanga was more promoted or pushed or approved or deemed better by that Meiji government, which was promoting that Western emphasis or Western improvements, Western changes, let's say. Plenty of things Western civilization has done that's good. But they were making changes to their art, and Watanabe was really interested in keeping some of that traditional Japanese woodblock prints alive. And I have to say, I love these Shin Hanga pieces of art. I've always loved them from when I first saw them. I think Watanabe was definitely onto something. And I think they're very fun to look at. But unfortunately, when they first came around, they were perceived as being a cheap imitation to what had come before, the ukiyo-e masters. They were perceived as not having something new to offer, but instead just being cheap imitations of what had come before. The masters, I think, had come and gone, and now we were just doing cheap things, cheap commercial changes. And the real artists were in those Sosaku Hanga style artists, which was also a lot more about the individual artist, which is, again, when you think of like Western art, you think of very much like an individual artist doing the work. So initially, it kind of was passed aside as something that wasn't truly artistic. However, in recent years, it has gotten a little bit more recognition and people have come to view it as art correctly in its own right. And I love it. I think it's fantastic. So that is the first half of the book, and that is all in this. It's very easy to digest, but it is in this text format, which with some prints around it. So that is the first half of the book. So now I want Art to take over, and I'm just going to show you some of the prints that I found really enjoyable in this book. First one's on page 31. Love the sky on this one. I feel like the sky is really well done in a lot of these Shin Hanga prints. I love the colors that they get in them. And I'm trying to remember back to all the ukiyo-e books I've read. I feel like the skies were never this vibrant. The ukiyo-e stuff is absolutely fantastic in its own right. I don't want to like compare in that way. It's like comparing apples to oranges, but I love the way that this artists do the sky in this art style. Next is on page 32 to 33. And this is where we see some changes that came from Shin Hanga. So even though there was a focus on traditional Japanese subjects and themes and ideas, there was also this opening up of the world. So Japanese artists were traveling or depicting areas that were not inside Japan. Well, if you look at the ukiyo-e, especially the landscapes, it's almost exclusively in Japan. So this is some of those Shin Hanga prints from other places outside of Japan. This is Niagara Falls, I believe. Yes, we have the Grand Canyon up here, and Mount Rainier over here. So we can see there's changes in the subjects that are being depicted as well. Next, page 38. So this was actually a print where another thing that came up a lot in this Shin Hanga world was showing the same scene but depicted at different times of day. And this was a print that was actually in the other book that I read about Shin Hanga. And one of my problems with the other book is that the prints were not big enough. The prints in the other book, the text was fantastic, but the prints were really, really small. And this was one of those prints that was really small in the other Shin Hanga book. And I feel like it's appropriately sized here so you can see the variation between early morning and in the evening between these two prints, and you can really see the artist's ability. So I appreciate that in this book. I feel like the prints were appropriately sized, which was one of the complaints I had about the other Shin Hanga book. Page 44 was another fantastic piece of art. You can just enjoy this one. I feel like this one speaks for itself. I really would like to get a print of this. This one is really pretty. Next is on page 48. I think I just like these cherry blossoms or any of these pink flowers. I'm a sucker for them. This one down here I really like as well. I feel like also the colors really, really pop in these prints. The next one is on page 59. Here's another one similar to the last one, but I believe they're different bridges, but similar. I really like this one as well. This is another great one. Page 59. On page 66 and 67, we have penguins. I love penguins. They're one of my favorite animals, and I have never seen them depicted in art like this. I don't know if I've ever seen an ukiyo-e print of penguins. Not sure if they exist. So it's super cool that we see this Shin Hanga print of penguins. The Gentoo penguins, that was by Yoshida Toshi. Next one is on page 71. This is what I'm talking about when I say the sky and the color is just fantastic. I love this one. I love the sky. I love the colors in it. I think it's fantastic. Page 71. And the final one I'm going to show you, because I can't sit here and show you every picture in the book all day, is on page 102. Let's get there. This one down here, I just really like. So overall, I think this book does a really good job presenting a clear timeline and history of the Shin Hanga art movement, especially for someone who's not an art historian or an art critic like me. My experience with art and art history is restricted to a couple humanities classes and an art history class that I took in college, and all of the reading that I've done. So I need things broken down into very simple terms when explained to me, and I think this book did a really fantastic job of that. Also, as I've already mentioned, I feel like the prints, when they're in here, are like an acceptable and appropriate size. One of my big problems with the other book on Shin Hanga, which had fantastic text, I have to say, the text in the other Shin Hanga book was absolutely fantastic and interesting, but the prints were really, really small, and I struggled to see them because they were so small, and I like the print size in this one. So I have to say that the print size in this book was much better in my opinion. And of course, this has inspired me to go view the art gallery. I do think maybe restricting to just the prints in that art gallery might restricted what the authors could have shown from the prints, but they did a perfectly good job with the prints they have, which tells me that they have a very good sized collection of this, and it makes me want to go check it out and book that trip to British Columbia because I want to see these prints in person. I think art is always better viewed in person, but I do not have unlimited funds to go to every art museum in the world, so I think when we have fantastic books like this book, Shin Hanga by Barry Till, they can kind of bring the art to us at home, and we can make decisions about which art galleries we want to go visit and see in person. Again, if you liked this review of Shin Hanga, check out the other Shin Hanga books, which I will have linked as a video on the very end of this video. If you have any thoughts, comments, or corrections to what I've said, please put it in the comment section down below. I'm not an art historian and I'm not perfect, so please leave your comments in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.